Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
And I'm Sunny.
And Sunny, last time you were telling me about this this TikTok dance you were trying to learn.
Oh, yeah.
How's that going?
Well.
Are you a TikTok star yet?
You know what? I think I'm going to stick to my 80s moves.
Okay.
I think the internet's probably better off that way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I feel you there. So speaking of things that are maybe better left to the experts, I was in Beijing recently, and the lines at the airport were insane.
Oh, wow.
They were so long, and everyone was so patient and orderly.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could do it.
Okay, so that leads me to think this is a good transition into our deep dive today.
Yes, exactly.
Which is
bundle culture in China.
Bundle culture.
So like imagine someone cuts that line at the airport in Beijing, right?
Yeah.
In America, people would be like, hey, what are you doing? But in China, it might be a little different.
It's a little different because of this carrot called bundle culture.
Bundle culture.
Have you ever heard of this?
I haven't really.
Okay, so bundle culture is this idea that in China, if you criticize someone's actions, you're actually criticizing the entire Chinese population as a whole.
Whoa.
So like, let's say someone cuts the line in the airport in Beijing and you're like, hey, what are you doing? They're going to take that as you're criticizing all Chinese people.
So it's like I'm criticizing the entire country.
The entire country, yeah.
Just because I told one person to not cut.
Yes.
That's wild. And you know what that actually reminds me? I was talking to a friend of mine from China, and I was talking about a specific government policy. And I was kind of sharing my concerns about it. And they got so defensive.
Right.
It was like I was attacking them personally. And it took me a while to realize that, oh, maybe I just stumbled into this bundle culture thing.
I think you did because it's a big part of their collectivism.
Collectivism.
Yeah, and it's different from here in the U.S. We're very individualistic.
Right.
But in China, they're very collectivist, meaning they really focus on the good of the group.
So it's not me, me, me. It's more like we.
Family is a huge deal in China, but it's not just your immediate family. It's your ancestors, your extended family, and even your community.
It's everyone.
Yeah, and there's a big sense of loyalty and responsibility for those in your in-group.
So if I'm criticizing one person, I'm criticizing their entire family.
Yes.
Their community.
Their community.
And maybe even their country.
Their country.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a lot to think about.
It is a lot to think about, and especially when we think about their education system, which really stresses patriotism and unity.
Okay.
So from a young age, they're taught to be very proud of their country, and they're taught to be very sensitive towards any criticisms that come from outside of China.
So that totally makes sense why my friend was so offended when I criticized that one government policy.
Yeah.
It's like I criticized their family.
Yeah, and it would be different here.
Yeah.
Let's say someone criticizes the U.S. president.
Right.
Some people would agree. Some people would disagree.
Yeah, it's all fair game.
It's all fair game. It's part of the political system. But in China, it's not like that. If you criticize a leader, you're criticizing China itself.
So it's like we argue about politics over Thanksgiving dinner, but in China, that would cause a family feud.
Right.
It's wild. So what about all the young people in China who are like, super plugged into global trends and stuff? Like, how does that fit in with this whole bundle culture thing?
Well, that's where it gets interesting because China is changing. Especially with the younger generation, there's a big rise in individualism, globalization, social media. All of that are contributing to that, and they're wanting to do their own thing.
So is bundle culture like disappearing?
Well, it's not that easy.
Okay.
It's not like a light switch you can just turn off.
Right.
Collectivism is still really ingrained in their culture.
Yeah.
But they are trying to balance the two.
So it's like trying to mix oil and water. They don't really mix, but if you shake it up, you can get some kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's what makes bundle culture so fascinating. It's not this rigid thing. It's evolving and adapting as Chinese society changes.
Okay, so we've got tradition and change, individualism and collectivism. It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do in part 2 of our deep dive into bundle culture. We're going to explore those contradictions and the nuances and all that fun stuff.
I love it.
Yeah.
Ready for part 2 of our deep dive into bundle culture?
Absolutely. Last time we were talking about this question, like, if collectivism is so strong in China, why do we hear about people suffering, like those facing wage theft and stuff without anyone stepping in to help?
Right.
It's kind of a head scratcher.
Yeah, and that question really highlights how bundle culture isn't always so black and white. If collectivism is so strong in China, why do we hear about people suffering, like those facing wage theft, without others stepping in to help? It seems like a contradiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of twists and turns, contradictions, and that makes it even more fascinating, I think.
Okay, so let's untangle this a little bit. Why do we see this, lack of help sometimes, even when people are struggling?
Right.
It seems like it goes against the whole collectivism thing.
Well, remember how we were talking about how collectivism in China often focuses on specific in-groups?
So your family, your really close friends, that inner circle, it's not necessarily about feeling responsible for everyone in society as a whole.
So it's kind of like, I got your back if you're in my circle, but if you're not, well...
Yeah, but it's not just about that. There are other things at play, too, like social trust. Studies actually suggest that social trust, especially trust in strangers, is relatively low in China compared to other countries.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you don't trust someone, you're not really going to go out of your way to help them, are you?
Right. It's like lending money to a stranger. You'd probably think twice.
Exactly. And there's also that fear, like getting involved in something messy or risky.
Yeah.
People might worry about legal consequences, or they just don't want to make waves.
Right.
Like that saying, no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly.
Sometimes it's better to just not get involved.
Right. And on top of that, there's also this perception that, helping those in need is the government's responsibility.
Okay.
It's not necessarily individuals' responsibility.
Especially with things like wage theft. I guess people think, well, the system should fix that.
Right.
It's not really my problem.
Right. So it's not just a lack of empathy or caring.
Right.
It's about this whole web of cultural norms and practical concerns and even the role of government.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. But here's what's really interesting. While we see these limitations of collectivism in some situations, there are other areas where it's still super strong.
Okay. Like what? What are you thinking?
Think about national identity. When it comes to China's image on the world stage, bundle culture goes into overdrive.
Okay.
Any criticism from outsiders is met with this fierce and united defense.
So it's like the entire nation is protecting their reputations.
Yes.
They're like, you come at one of us, you come at all of us.
Exactly. It all ties back to the education system and the emphasis on patriotism that we talked about.
Right.
So from a young age, they're taught to be proud of their country and to see any attack on China as a personal attack on themselves.
Wow. So it's like that circle of loyalty and protection. It expands from your family and your community to the whole country.
Exactly. It's like the country itself becomes part of that close-knit in-group that we talked about.
Okay, so we've got this crazy mix of, collectivism and social trust and individual responsibility and national identity.
I know, it's a lot.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded.
I know, but here's the thing. To remember, bundle culture, like any cultural phenomenon, is always evolving.
Okay.
We talked about the rise of individualism, especially among the younger generation.
Right.
And with that shift comes a different perspective on criticism and responsibility.
So are you saying we might see a future where people in China are more willing to speak out against injustice, even if it means going against the grain?
Yeah.
Challenging the bundle?
It's definitely possible, but change takes time, right?
Yeah.
Even as China embraces new ideas and global influences, those deep-rooted cultural norms aren't going to disappear overnight.
It's like that tangled ball of yarn we talked about earlier. We're slowly untangling it.
Exactly.
It's a process.
It's a process, and that's what makes studying culture so interesting. It's always changing and adapting.
Always throwing new curveballs.
It is. All right, so where do we stand now in our understanding of bundle culture in China? What have we learned?
Yeah. What's the takeaway?
Well, I think we've uncovered some really important insights. We've seen how collectivism, while a core value isn't always a one-size-fits-all concept.
Right.
We've explored reasons why people might hesitate to help others. And we've seen that fierce loyalty that emerges when national identity is at stake.
And most importantly, we learned that bundle culture isn't this rigid, monolithic thing.
Right.
It's fluid, dynamic, full of contradictions. It's a tapestry,
It is, and it's those contradictions that make it so fascinating.
So much to think about. So much to discuss.
It is. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But our deep dive into bundle culture isn't over yet.
Oh.
We have one more part to this exploration, and we're going to get global.
Yeah.
We're going to examine how different cultures perceive and interact with this concept.
I cannot wait.
All
right, folks, stay tuned for part 3. But in the meantime, why not check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel?
Micky!
Micky's Whiskey Corner. He's got some fantastic whiskey reviews, and who knows, those travel vlogs might be ready to roll.
Yes, support Micky, everyone.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk for the final part of our deep dive into bundle culture in China.
Wow, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. I feel like we've talked about everything, like collectivism, individualism, social trust. I mean, the list goes on and on.
We've covered a lot.
But today, we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at bundle culture from a global perspective.
I like it.
Kind of expand our horizons a bit.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, bundle culture is often seen through a Western lens. And our ideas about, individualism and collectivism, they're really shaped by our own cultural backgrounds and experiences.
So like the way we see bundle culture might not be the whole picture.
Exactly. Like take criticizing governments, for example.
Okay.
In a lot of Western cultures, it's totally normal to openly criticize your leaders.
Yeah.
It's seen as a sign of a healthy democracy.
Right.
But in China, that same criticism can be seen as disrespectful to the entire nation.
It's like those two different Thanksgiving dinners we were talking about.
Exactly.
What's normal in one culture could be a huge no-no in another.
Exactly. And, sometimes these cultural differences lead to some awkward moments.
For sure.
There's been a lot of discussion lately about how Western media portrays China.
Yeah.
And how it often reinforces stereotypes about bundle culture.
So instead of trying to understand, they just focus on the stuff that seems weird to them.
Right. And unfortunately, that can create these really negative perceptions.
Yeah.
And it just makes it harder for different cultures to understand each other.
Yeah. It's like judging a book by its cover.
Yeah, you don't even bother to read the story inside.
I feel like the more we understand each other's cultures, the better off we'll all be.
Absolutely.
Like imagine a world where we can appreciate the differences instead of getting hung up on them.
Right. And that's why we're doing this deep dive.
Exactly.
It's about encouraging understanding, not judgment,
Yeah.
Just recognizing that different cultures have different ways of seeing the world.
And that's okay.
Yeah, it's more than okay. It's what makes the world so fascinating.
Right. So there's one thing that's been kind of bugging me. We've talked about how strong collectivism is in China, but then we also see these examples of people not helping each other out.
Right.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
How do those two things exist at the same time?
Well, remember, culture is complex.
Okay.
It's a tapestry of history and traditions and evolving values.
Right.
It's full of these paradoxes and gray areas.
It's like that really good cup of coffee that keeps surprising you.
Exactly.
Every time you take a sip.
All right. So as we wrap up this deep dive into bundle culture,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners? What do we want them to remember?
What have we learned?
I think the biggest thing is to approach cultural differences with curiosity.
Okay.
And an open mind. Instead of jumping to conclusions, let's try to understand the why behind certain behaviors.
Like why criticizing one person might feel like criticizing a whole group.
Exactly.
Or why social trust might influence whether someone helps a stranger.
Right. It's all about understanding the context.
The context.
And second, I hope they'll remember to be mindful of their own cultural biases.
Ooh, that's a good one.
We all have them.
We do.
And they shape how we see the world.
For sure.
Being aware of those biases can help us avoid misunderstandings and build stronger connections with people from different cultures.
Less judging, more understanding.
Yes, and maybe a little less line cutting.
Always a good rule of thumb.
No matter where you are in the world.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on our 3-part deep dive into bundle culture in China.
It's been real.
It's been a wild ride, I gotta say.
It has.
Full of contradictions, and I feel like we've all learned something new.
I think so, too. We've had a blast sipping and talking with you all, and we hope you learned a thing or two along the way.
And hey, if you're still feeling thirsty for knowledge, don't forget to check out our buddy Micky's YouTube channel, Micky's Whiskey Corner.
Yeah.
He's got some amazing whiskey reviews.
Yes.
And you never know, those travel vlogs might be up by now.
Cheers to that.
Until next time, everyone.